Hello. Welcome. My name is Kevin Frankish. This is the Mental Health Podcast. So glad you could join me. She was one of the stars of what critics call arguably one of the greatest achievements in Canadian television. The series and the characters she played have achieved cult-like status, mainly because they found an audience of adolescents. The show dealt realistically with serious concerns and issues facing adolescents. Ironically, she herself was facing some of these same issues behind the camera: eating disorders, depression, even suicidal ideations. In the years that followed, she's worked very hard to pull herself out of these challenges, while at the same time helping others overcome their challenges. She played 10-year-old Lisa Kennard, then teen Caitlin Ryan on the Degrassi series. My guest, Stacie Moana Mistysyn. Stronger with Stacie, right now on the Mental Health Podcast. Well, hi, Stacie. A pleasure to speak with you.
Hello. Good to see you.
You have so much that I want to talk about and unpack because you have an incredible story. You're such a wonderful role model and such an advocate for mental health as well. But let's start back at the beginning, going back to 1979. What were you doing?
I was working on a show called Kids of Degrassi Street, playing a character named Lisa Kennard.
And you went on, actually, and we should tell people that you went on from Lisa to Caitlin Ryan in another Degrassi.
Yes. So it was Kids of Degrassi Street, Degrassi Junior High, and then Degrassi High. So I auditioned for a new character for Degrassi Junior High.
So tell me, you know what? First of all, let's give people a little bit of a flavor for Kids of Degrassi Street. Let's go back to 1979.
Dad?
Yeah?
What if you were a reporter and you knew about something? Would you report it?
No, that's kind of hard to say,
Just suppose.
That's what a reporter usually does if they're sure they have all the facts.
Yeah, but what if you had proof,
Uh-huh.
but it turned out to be bad news?
Well, newspapers don't usually keep bad news from people just because it's bad.
Okay, you know what? I was thinking, too, that little exchange would go really well today when we talk about news and truth and in our news today.
Yeah, it still holds up. It's so true. And it's such a nice father-daughter moment.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your time in the studios and how that impacted you. This is where you had to grow up fast, didn't you?
I did. I mean, I loved it because I was always very independent, and it gave us it gave us an outlet for whatever we might have been going through in our personal lives. But yes, we were surrounded by adults. We were working professionally, even though, and a lot of people don't realize that it was a non-union show. So not as professional maybe as other sets, union sets. But so, and in fact, we did a lot more work. Like we were carrying sandbags around. We were on kitchen duty, washing dishes. Like they put us to work.
Yeah, I love there's a line you have that you say, and that is, we were treated like children, but expected to act like adults.
Yes. Yeah. So it got very complicated. Because on one hand, we were expected, to be professional, but on the other hand, we were still kids, and we were treated. I felt like on set it was more like when you got in trouble, you'd be going to the principal's office, which was the producer, mm-hmm. and we would be reprimanded or scolded. So it was a very weird dynamic, weird balance.
And this is tough. You lost out on part of your childhood, a big chunk of your childhood, and a very developmental time. 8 years old is everything when it comes to developing the kind of person that you are going to go on to be. So that must have been tough on you mentally?
It was, but I would say it was, I mean, when we started, it wasn't nearly as much of a workload. Like we were working long days, and I'm sure, working more than we were by union standards we should have on a day, but they broke it up so that we weren't really missing much school. When we got to Degrassi Junior High, and of course that's when I was more, a tween and becoming a teenager, struggling with my own self-esteem issues, that's when it got tricky. And, today, right, this is my big thing. Today, workplaces have HR, they have someone, hopefully, that you can turn to when you have a mental health issue. Mm-hmm. There was none of that for us. And in fact, if anything, we were trying to balance our regular lives with this fictional school, like regular school, fictional school. But I found that I really didn't have anyone that I trusted to talk to. Because we also got to a point on the show where I was beginning to feel like, are these people really looking out for my best interest? Or am I, being used for business purposes? Because at the end of the day, I had that harsh realization that business is business. And it's not like when we were younger, and I might have held the producers up to be like, alternate parents or people that really, looked after us, because that was kind of the vibe it was when we were younger. You get older and you realize that it's not that. And that was, it was, I felt very alone for a long time, I think, as a teenager, trying to figure that stuff out.
You would go on, sadly, to develop an eating disorder. How did that come about?
So working on the show, and I say all the time, Kevin, I can't imagine what it would have been like if we had the social media that we have today. Because back then, we didn't have Facebook yet. We didn't have any kind of social media to like today's standards. We had magazines. We had, mostly when we were doing tours or live appearances, the feedback we would get, people would always make comments about my body. Not necessarily to be mean. The intentions were always good, but as a teenager, and when my body started changing all of a sudden, and I didn't understand what the changes were all about or why, I was very sensitive to any comments. And a lot of the comments were like, you look shorter, you're shorter in real life, or you look bigger on TV. I used
to get a lot of, oh, you're much better looking in person. and again, it's all the best intentions, but come on.
But then you focus on that. You become hyper aware.
You can have 1,000 people say how wonderful you are and you're incredible and you look great. And you get that one person. Well, you know what? You're a little chunky. You're going to fixate on that.
It's so true. That's all it takes, right? We tend to focus more on the negative. That's what we hold on to. And again, at that age, you're already very hyper aware of your body and how people see you. And so I had that added challenge, I guess, of knowing that people all over the world were seeing me. And I think I became very self-conscious, largely because of that, like even just walking down the street. And then I started getting, it didn't happen right away because the show took a little bit to catch on. And it wasn't cool right out of the gate. So when I was going to high school, being on the show wasn't necessarily a cool thing. I still struggled, to fit in. And I recall like being on the streetcar and starting to get recognized by other teenagers and be like, hey, and it would never be like, hey, are you on that show? It'd be like, Degrassi, to see if I would turn around. And then it'd be like, let's follow her. Let's get off and see where she goes. Stuff like that, which was creepy and, just made you that extra, bit self-conscious. And then, of course, there's the family dynamic. My sister was very jealous of the attention that I was getting because she was going through her own issues. You know, she was going through her own teenage issues. She's 2 years older than me. So it was a lot to manage, again, without having someone that I felt I could talk to. My parents were then going through a divorce, so they weren't really accessible emotionally for me that way. And so I started feeling like I had no control over things that were happening in my life, and so maybe I can control my body, and that's what I was attempting to do. I know now that what I was doing was self-abuse. I was totally abusing myself emotionally and physically. I tried anorexia, but I enjoy eating too much. So that actually developed more into bulimia, where I would go for a while, be very careful about not eating too much or what I was eating. And then I would be super hungry and I would binge. And then I would be throwing up. I'd be forcing myself to throw up. I was popping diuretics, which is a really bad thing to do because we need fluids. We need hydration. That actually helps us. But I was doing everything the opposite of what I should have been doing. And I started popping laxatives. I was taking like 10 laxatives a day, which is gross now. And it's horrible for me to even think about what I was doing. Not glamorous. And I was also working out excessively. So back then, working out to me was not to be healthy. It was appearance driven. And again, I was working out too much. So I was more tired, more stressed, more anxious and irritable. And it all came crashing down eventually. I just reached that point. Didn't have my period for a year. I was amenorrheic. So these are all signs. There were lots of signs. And I always encourage people, if you're not sure if you have a problem, to really pay attention to things that might indicate that you might need help. I would wear my belt super tight. Even that was a sign. Like I had this thing where I'd wear it like more tight than was comfortable. You can even see it in like Schools Out, the 2-hour Degrassi finale we did. I would wear these belts that were like really tight, but nobody knew.
And we know now. We know now, and really we've only come into this in the last relatively short period of time, that an eating disorder is definitely a mental health issue, a mental health disease. We know now that it has the highest mortality rate of any other mental disorder whatsoever. But then it was just, you know what? It was something that teenage girls and models did. Oh. You know, they would eat a nice meal and then go into the bathroom and put their finger down their throat, and, you know, no harm, no foul. But we know now how much damage is being done to the body. And we know it wasn't even considered a mental health issue back then.
No. And it started even with like not wanting to breathe a certain way. I remember like another friend on the show, when we were doing like publicity trips and we were away, first of all, we'd stress about the fact that we couldn't get healthy food while we were away. It's like, what were we going to eat? And we would try to breathe from our chest. And I took karate when I was younger. I was a blue belt and we learned to breathe from our diaphragm. I was totally trying to change that so that I was not having my stomach come out. It's like little things like that are just, it's crazy to me now, but that's how it starts. Just these little things.
How bad did it get, and when did it turn around?
So it got to the point, like I said, I didn't have my period for a year because my body didn't have enough nutrients. The turning point, interestingly enough, is because I knew that what I was doing, inherently, I knew what I was doing was bad for me, but nobody was noticing and nobody was saying anything. So I just figured, well, I'm doing what I need to do. And it wasn't until a boy that I was dating We had gone to a public event, and he told me after that he had friends that were asking if I was anorexic. And for some reason, that was like, I could have dismissed it as, oh, well, girls are catty, right? And so, they're going to make a comment. But the other part of me was like, well, maybe people are really noticing something. Like, it made me second guess how I looked. Because again, it was all like I was so paranoid about my appearance, and what I was seeing wasn't necessarily accurate. I didn't even trust, my own vision. So I finally went to my GP, my family doctor, and I hinted at the fact that, I wasn't really eating well. I don't remember what I said to her. It either wasn't enough of a hint, or she just kind of dismissed it, but she told me to eat more vegetables. And so I left, and I was just kind of like, okay, that wasn't helpful. And then I finally, the second time I went to see her, I think I reached that point after the comment about the anorexia, and I knew I was feeling really crappy. So I just spelled it out for her. And she put me in touch with a clinic. And going to that clinic, it was just like a day thing. And first of all, I was also paranoid about getting recognized. So that's why I was putting it off for so long too. Because I had that added thing of like, people are going to recognize me if I go to this thing. But I went, and it scared the bejesus out of me, because people were really like either far gone in their eating disorders. Like, it was like, for me, it might not have been as apparent, but for some of these people, it was really apparent. And hearing them tell their stories, it really hit home. And it was a real wake up call for me that I needed to change things up. So
How
yeah,
did
that
you
was a
change
turning
it?
point. Well, my first thing was I started educating myself on how to eat properly, because there's so much information out there, and yet not at our fingertips like it is today. And of course, today there's an abundance of information. You have to figure out what's true and what's not. But I started taking courses. After the show ended, I actually became certified as a fitness trainer so that I could teach myself how to work out properly and for myself. And it was really just those steps in educating myself and gaining confidence, I think, in myself too. Once the show ended, that was another wake-up call where I really had to figure out what I was going to do. So I was lost for a while there.
You must have an extremely strong personality in order, because it sounds like you did this on your own. And that is tough.
Well, and I think that's largely why I struggled for as long as I did. Because, I actually got kicked out of the house I wasn't kicked out. I was given an ultimatum that I had to, it's a long story, but I had switched. My parents didn't like that my marks were slipping when I was going through my depression and anxiety and skipping a lot of school during the show. So I went to an alternative school, and I loved that because I could be independent. I could work at my own pace. Once my parents got divorced, that was not ideal because I was around the house too much. So my mom gave me an ultimatum that I had to either go back to my old school that I had left far behind, or I had to move out of the house. Thankfully, I had money from the show. It wasn't a lot of money. And subsequently, it largely went into rent, to paying rent. But
how old were you at the time? How old were you at the time?
I was 17, or I guess I was, 17, turning 18. So that's when I was able to legally move out. I stayed with a boyfriend for a while till I found my own place. But so all of this stuff I was doing on my own. And again, if I had like a role model or somebody that I trusted that I could have talked to about any of this, that would have been so helpful, really helpful.
Like I said, there is so much to talk about. I want to fast forward now to 2010 and your brother, Corey.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
So another wake up call. So my brother had his own struggle, even from a young age, with anxiety, and he had been on the waiting list. Now he was on and off different medications from a young age that often helped him, and he was on a waiting list to start seeing a psychiatrist again. But as we all know, waiting lists can be very long. And but things were looking good. He was going to start a brand new job the next day. He was a very smart IT guy, very creative, so talented. He was in a band. And there was personal stuff going on in his life, and he took his own life. He jumped from his balcony, and didn't die right away. He was in a coma for a bit, but things just got progressively worse. And so our question was often like, if he does wake up, how is he going to feel now? Because his quality of life is so compromised. But ultimately, he did pass away. And the very next day is when, ironically, he got a call from the psychiatrist that there was an opening. But that was really, I mean, obviously it was horrible, but it was also particularly scary for me because my brother and I felt were very similar in a lot of ways. And knowing that was a possibility. Now, like you can fantasize about suicide, you can, think about it. And then when it actually, someone that has actually done it, it becomes that much more real. And I had made attempts in the past, more, I think, as cries for help.
And I'm sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's important that I just quickly bring up the fact, yes, we are talking about suicide. Yeah. And I know that there are people right now who are dealing with these ideations. Yes. And I want you to know, and I think this is probably the whole point of what you're about to tell us. I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know that before you make any decisions whatsoever, if nothing, you can call 988. 988, and they're going to answer the call 24/7, 365. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to send the cops or anything like that. But they're going to open a bit of a window for you, because that's the problem, right? Is we have people who are thinking about self-harm, and they get the blinders on and all the windows are shut, and they think there's only one way out. And I just want people to realize that you are not alone, even though you may seem to feel that way right now, that you're in the dark, but you're not. So please believe me. And if you need, 988 is right there. So I apologize for interrupting you, but no, it's really important to pass along.
It's really important. And there are plenty of resources out there, even for like, if you think you might have an eating disorder as well. And I should have mentioned this before. There are you can like chat with someone online if you're not even comfortable talking in person. But right, definitely do not be afraid to reach out.
Now, when I interrupted you, you were talking about your own dealings with suicidal ideations or actual attempts. Is that what you're saying? And with that, we're going to pause until the next episode. There's so much more that Stacie and I talked about. In part 2 of our conversation, Stacie talks about how she became so overwhelmed with depression and eating disorders that she just wanted it all to end.
But there were times when I would get to that really dark place, and I'm sure a lot of people know what I'm talking about, where you feel like there is no tomorrow. You're just stuck in that really dark place. And what I have learned now is that I have to focus on those, I find like those core memories where there was something that made me feel really good about myself, or that makes life worth living for. And just remembering that I can get through this. There will be a sunnier day.
That is part 2 with Stronger with Stacie. We'll be right back in 30 seconds with your call to action.
You know, kids have it so much easier these days than I did growing up.
Well, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, adolescents today report higher rates of depression and anxiety than adults. In fact, suicide is a leading cause of death among adolescents. Ask your doctor about the Adolescent Inpatient Program at Ontario Shore Centre for Mental Health Science. Our specialized team provides holistic care and ensures you to stay on track with your schooling. Learn more at ontarioshores.ca/adolescents.
Welcome back. Here is your mental health call to action. Stacie spoke about wake-up calls. Wake-up calls that she was fortunate enough to hear, to understand, to act on, and it changed her life. Psychology Today defines wake-up calls as an awakening to something one has been ignoring. The problem is we tend to ignore these wake-up calls themselves because we don't know what we're listening for. But we can't ignore them for much longer, or we hit rock bottom. It may be a loss of a job or friends. The wake-up call may be a change in your health. Now, if you truly open up, these wake-up calls go from a whisper to a shout. So here is your call to action. Listen. Learn to recognize wake-up calls you might be getting. They might be something like losing a job, losing friends, from having panic attacks. Now write them down. Then write down what you're going to do about it to answer these wake-up calls. It might be something to do with an addiction, or you might have to reach out for help. Your body is telling you it's full up with stress. In fact, I honestly believe that panic attacks are actually a wake-up call. They are your check engine light. Now, we can just put a piece of tape over that check engine light, ignore it, but the problem isn't going to go away. You're still going to have an engine that seizes up if you don't pay attention and act on these wake-up calls. So that is your call to action. Listen, write it down, and act on wake-up calls. I'm Kevin Frankish. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other. So, what did you think of this episode? What topics or guests would you like me to consider in future episodes? Email me at thementalhealthpodcast@ontarioshores.ca. Visit ontarioshores.ca/thementalhealthpodcast for a list of mental health resources and support. The Mental Health Podcast is a production of Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences.